कंट्रोल्स में, तो मैम उसके बाद हम इनका कॉजल जो रिलेशनशिप या कॉजल एसोसिएशन है वो कैसे मैम एस्टैब्लिश करते हैं, जो इसका फाइनल स्टेप होता है स्टडी का?
We don't really, establish causal association in case control study. Now, why these proportions are generally shown to you, that how do we calculate proportion among cases, that out of total number of cases, if somebody asks you that what was the proportion of cases who were exposed, just for the sake of calculation. Otherwise, whenever we have to look for the association, we go for odds ratio in case control studies. We don't really calculate a ratio of all that, and we look for, otherwise that would have been your relative risk.
मैम
जी
मैम मैं ये पूछ रहा था कि जो कंट्रोल्स है मैम, उसमें हम ये अपना जो बी डिवाइडेड बाय बी प्लस डी जो प्रोपोर्शन है, ये हम क्यों कैलकुलेट करते हैं? उसमें मैम हमें क्या फर्क पड़ता है मैम? वो तो कंट्रोल्स है, उनमें तो डिजीज है ही नहीं, वो हमें क्या फर्क पड़ता है कि वो एक्सपोज हुए हैं या नहीं हुए?
Till the time we don't really compare them, we won't be able to make out that who had an association with a particular risk factor. We are looking for associations, right? That's why we need to know. Otherwise, you would have said that if we can understand, or if we know the incidence of the disease or the proportion of illness among those who are having a particular risk factor, why we are looking for those, why we are looking for the proportion of illness among those who don't have that particular risk factor. So what was the answer to that? Give me the answer. Why we are interested in calculating the proportion of illness among those who are non-exposed?
मैम ये जो हम b डिवाइडेड बाय b प्लस d कर रहे हैं मैम, इसमें तो
why we calculate proportion of illness among those who are non-exposed? Yes, try to give answer to this. The answer lies in this question.
मैम because exposure को देखना चाहते हैं कि उसका effect क्या है.
Yes, whether having that particular exposure will make them more at risk or more vulnerable for having a particular disease or not. Just recall that example, that if somebody who is suffering with a particular disease and having a risk factor, how would you advocate, or how would you convince your patient for putting that particular risk factor? Till the time you don't really know how much is the risk among those. Why? Remember, recall added risk, more risk. Who has more risk or who has lesser risk? See, we all share risk together. Do you understand that? Now, please, all of you, look at this graph that I'm going to draw in response to this question. This is what it is. Now, what are these two? What I've made? These are two
bars.
Absolutely. These are two bars. And this is your y-axis. And if I say that this is level of risk, right? And this is basically, if I say that they are non-exposed and they are exposed, now see what is happening in this particular scenario. Now this means that whether we have that particular risk factor, that whatever risk factor is under investigation that you want to research, Say, for example, I gave you the example of CA lung and smoking, the simplest example. Say, for example, in this particular case, risk is smoking, right? Now, what this bar is showing, who are these non-exposed individuals?
Don't have CA lung.
Level of risk is less.
They
Or
are
never
not
smoked.
smokers. They do,
Right? And
non-exposed means
yes, non-exposed means that they are non-smokers. They don't have that risk of smoking with them, right? Now, exposed are all those individuals who are smokers. Now, since all those who are non-smokers, do we think that they don't have any risk?
ma'am, they do have risk.
They do have risk.
Low level of risk.
Yes, there is. How would we come to know that they have low level of risk or they have more level of risk or the risk is going to be the same?
Ma'am,
Till
when
the
we
time-
compare both of them.
Yes, by comparing, right? So this risk that is shared by exposed individuals is basically the combination of two different types of risk. Till this point, I have to admit one request, so I have to. See, Ali, till this point, share the risk together. The non-exposed and exposed, they are going to share the risk together. And this risk that we all share together, irrespective of the fact that whether somebody has a risk factor or no risk factor, we call it as a background risk. I've written it in short, but this is not a standard, acronym or mnemonic for this. This is a background risk that we all share together. Now, this added risk, how would we get to know about this added risk? Till the time we won't compare both of these risks. So, for comparison reasons, whether it is an exposure, it's a risk factor among cases or control, or whether it is the incidence of disease among exposed, we can't really calculate or we can't really comment till the time we won't compare them. Now you got it, Ali. Why do we compare it?
मैम आई एम क्लियर टिल नाउ. मैम जो चीज़ मुझे बॉदर कर रही है केस कंट्रोल स्टडीज की, कि मैम ये तो हम सिर्फ केसेस की बात कर रहे हैं ना मैम. ये तो सिर्फ नॉन एक्सपोज्ड में लेवल ऑफ रिस्क है या एक्सपोज में लेवल ऑफ रिस्क है. हम केसेस की बात करें मैम. मैम कंट्रोल.
Talk about exposure. In case control, say for example, if they are your controls, let me write it like this. Say for example, they are your controls. They are controls. And they are cases. What generally we get to know from our literature, here we say level of exposure. Does this mean that all those whom we are studying as controls, I have made that 2x2 table for you. And I've told you that yes, there are going to be few controls who are going to be exposed, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Now is it clear to you?
Yes, ma'am.
It's not.
Ma'am, I want to add something over here. It's just like a little complicated.
Yeah, जी, finish. Please go ahead.
मैम इसमें ये है ना कि देखिए हम केस कंट्रोल स्टडी में जा रहे हैं. अगर हम पीछे देख रहे हैं तो एक हमने जब एक ग्रुप चूज किया, एक कंट्रोल ऐसा ग्रुप है जिसको तो इन्फेक्शन हुई नहीं, और केसेस ऐसे ग्रुप हैं जिनको इन्फेक्शन हुई. तो हम हाँ ठीक है. तो अब हम उसमें जो फर्स्ट करें कैंसर समझ लें होगी, तो कंट्रोल तो हम आइडियली वही ग्रुप चूज करते हैं ना कि जो आइडियली फिट होता है, जिसके साथ मतलब
Not always the case. Who is this, please? I can't see. Who is this?
Ma'am, this is me, Afrinesh.
Afrinesh, go ahead. You said that in control, we generally select somebody who is generally fit.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that is not always the case. Not always our controls are altogether fit. At times, our controls are diseased also. Generally, where case control studies are taken. Case control studies are generally conducted in hospitals. That's why I didn't say that because otherwise, few of the people might have got that impression that they are hospital-based studies. Not always, but generally, people prefer to go in the hospital setting for conducting case control studies because it's easy to get both of these groups over there. Controls are going to be any group not suffering with that particular disease that is under investigation. I shared with them an example. You joined a little late probably today because I have made that point clear also before also that if you have taken CA breast, here you might have taken CA colon patients, right? You might have taken CA esophagus patients also. But they should be from the general population and they should be disease free. But most of the times, whenever researchers they go and they conduct case controls, because it's difficult to get a good control from the general population, so people find it easier to go in the or to select a control group from the same hospital. So if you remember, that is the reason why case control studies are generally not considered as of that worth as compared to cohort studies, and because they are liable to have this Bergsonian bias. This is the bias that is given to that, the bias that is generally labeled with these case control studies because of that hospital controls that are generally selected. Because hospital controls, they never represent general population or healthy individuals. Right? The exposure study, because who is coming to the hospital? The one who is having a special healthcare need. But generally, people select controls from the hospital because of feasibility, because of convenience and ease, or they can easily match the two groups together. So that's why people. Okay. Now, if you want to add on anything further, you can finish. Please go ahead.
No, thank you, ma'am. It's very well clear. Thank you.
Now, is it clear to you, Ali? Because Ali had a little, Ali wanted to know that why we are comparing these two groups. If they are non-diseased, why we are looking at their exposure status. So how would
Ma'am,
we...
Actually, what I studied earlier was the fact that we take proportion both in the cases and in the controls of the exposure, and then we compare them to build that causal association between the exposure and the establishment of the disease.
Where you studied that, Ali? Because last time in attack rate, the time duration is not taking into consideration. That was also a big surprise to me. Because I never said that in attack rate we never take into account time duration. I did say that whenever anything that is of limited duration, right, and generally attack rates, if go into the more detail, whenever we have to make projections or predictions, or whenever we have to make certain, we have to marshalize the things for future, keeping in mind some particular outbreak, the way we have pandemic these days. So generally we make use of attack rate, and you will be surprised to see that in many of the international works, attack rate is studied under the heading of incidence, proportion, and simple incidence. So then what would you label that? Right? So please keep mind a little broad. So you might have studied that thing, but I'm giving you the logic and justification for that. So that's why I look for the proportions. We can once we have the data, we can always say that what was the proportion of having an exposure among cases and what was the proportion of having exposure among controls. And I asked you people, and you told me very rightly that if we have to look for the proportion or percentage of having exposure exposure among cases, that would have been A over A plus C. And if we have to look for the proportion of exposure among controls, so that would have been B over B plus C. So that is all okay so far. But I told you that whenever we have to look an association of a disease with a particular risk factor from the past, there we, instead of looking into the incidences or instead of looking into the attack rates, we generally go for odds ratios because we haven't tracked them throughout that period of time. We don't have that incidence. We have to rely onto the information that your respondents are giving. Right? So that we look for the odds of having exposure with among cases and the odds of having exposure among controls.
Right.
Now, moving.
बस मैंने कहा
Yes.
सबकी तारीफ करते को तनख्वाह हलाल करते हो अपना पर्सनल काम है, तो मैं कहा मैं भी पर्सनल काम अपना ही बैठ करता हूँ। पढ़ रहा हूँ।
Faraz, if you can,
हाँ,
if you can hear me. Okay, now we were here. Moving on further, if you just look into, this is the, you will find hypothetical examples in your book. So just to give you an idea that if we have to look for a case control study of coronary heart disease and cigarette smoking. So if somebody asks you that what is the proportion or the percentage of cigarette smoking among coronary heart disease cases, so how would you calculate that? How did we get that 56%? How? Any one of you?
Ma'am, it's a percentage. That means it's proportion.
Yes, it's a proportion.
And this is just 112 divided by 200. That gives 56%.
Well done. Excellent. It's a proportion. So this means that out of the total number of cases, how many of them they were cigarette smokers? So we can see that 56% of the cases they were smokers in their past. So similarly for controls, if we have to look for, they were controls. They were not having that coronary heart disease. They were not suffering from coronary heart disease. Yet there were 44% of controls who were cigarette smokers in their past. Now, here comes the concept of odds. It's an alternative approach to the calculation of proportions that we have been studying so far, and I've given you that. Now, this is the example that is given in your book also. Say, for example, that there is a horse named Epibuty which has a 60% probability of winning the race. That is P, the probability of winning the race. But if somebody asks you that what is the probability of losing the race, how would you write it down? If P is the probability of winning the race,
And 1 minus P.
very well done. Very well done. That would be 1 minus P. P was the probability of winning. So this one, can I just say that 1 is 100?
Yes.
Very good. So if we just subtract this, so this means that 40% is the probability of losing.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, out of 100. Yes, ma'am.
Out of 100, very good. If we look into the probability of winning, so that would have been 60 by 100. But if I asked you the odds of winning, so that would be 60 over
40.
Or in formula form, we will just write it down the way it's written here. This much part. P over 1 minus P. That is your odds. Right? The probability would have been over 100. odds is P over 1 minus P. Moving back to screen share our presentation again, let's see. So there are probability of losing also. If these are the probabilities, what are the odds that the horse will win the race? To answer this, we must keep in mind the odds of an event. And how do we define that, or how do we get to know that what are the odds of an event? It's the ratio of number of the ways the event can occur. So it's the ratio of the number of times an event can occur to the number of times an event cannot occur. So this we have seen through our equation also. The number of times an event can occur to the number of times an event cannot occur. That is your odd. The probability or the number of times the event can occur, or the probability that this event will not occur. The probability that FAQT will win the race. So if we write it down in the form of equation, that would be P divided by 1 minus P. Right? This is what it is. So we'll find it up as 1.5. The way we get relative risk, right? So if you just look into the probability of winning, that would be 60%, or the odds of winning, that would be 1.5. So either we can write down what is the probability of having that event, or the probability of not having that event, right? Or we can always say that odds of having that event or odds of not having that event, right? Got it? We are gradually arriving into our formula that we have discussed. What is this? That is the probability of having that event, and that is the probability of not having that event. I'll come to this part later on. So now I'll take you that odds ratio in cohort study that I think, the few of the concepts are going to be clear in this particular learn. Let me just, let's stay over here, and let me just take you to the situation where I said that in which particular situation we can calculate odds ratio in cohort study design also. Are you all with me?
Yes,
Now,
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
moving back to cohort study design again, once again, we are going to go back to our cohort study design. You know, so far I made your case control studies. I made your 2x2 table for case control study, right? But do you remember I told you in the beginning of today's session that odds ratio has an added advantage. And what is that odds ratio? That odds ratio can be calculated
In cohort as well as course section.
very good. Now remember this thing. Now odds ratio, the gist of odds ratio is that it was initially designed for case control study design, because in case control study design, we said that we can't really directly calculate incidence. So indirectly, we intend to calculate an estimate of relative risk through odds ratio, right? But I told you that whenever the disease under investigation is uncommon or rare, what is the scenario? Rare disease or uncommon disease. Remember these two terms. For your cohort study designs, and you want to investigate that rare and uncommon study through cohort study design. In cohort, what we have? Exposed individuals. We take a start with exposed individuals, and we take a start with another group that is non-exposed, and we follow them up. Remember, we used to follow them up. They are prospective studies, follow-up studies, longitudinal, they go forward in time trend studies, all these terms we use for cohort. And we intend to look for the disease outcome. that whether exposed they develop more disease or non-exposed they develop more. Here is the outcome that we want to investigate. Now let's suppose this
Ma'am, that is why it has the incidence values.
That is why we calculate proportions or incidence probabilities or incidence of the risk among exposed and the risk among non-exposed. So that's why we calculate generally relative risk is calculated in cohort studies. But there is one situation in which relative risk is exactly equal to odds ratio whenever in cohort study design, whenever disease under investigation is rare or uncommon. Remember this thing. Now what happens here is A, B, C and D. Generally what we calculate, proportions or probability of having disease among exposed and probability of having disease among non-exposed, right? Now what happened here? See, if disease is rare or uncommon, what is going to happen? Think logically that this cell A is going to be very less, isn't it? Because it's a rare disease. This means that these positive cells are going to be very less. Very few individuals are going to develop disease among exposed, and yet very few are going to, a very nominal number is going to develop the disease among non-exposed ones. Does this make sense? Uncommon or rare disease means what?
Less exposure.
Less number of
Less number of less disease
disease.
This disease is infrequent. Very few people are going to suffer from the disease. So if this disease is so much rare among exposed individuals, and so this means that this A plus B is going to be negligible. If A is going to be very less, this means in simple mathematics, what do? Can we just equate this A plus B into more or less equal to B? Can we equate it like this?
Yes,
Mathematically. Because A is very less. So obviously it is not going to create a difference. So can we just write it down as A over B? Because we have equated that A plus B is more or less equal to B. So similarly, C plus D, we can equate this C plus D into more or less, it is going to be approximated as D. You know, if one entity is very negligible, the way we do rounding off, we said that this can be rounded off to simple one figure. Similarly, if anything that is very rare, so this means that these cells are going to be very less number. So we can simply equate them as B here. A plus B can be simply called as B. So instead of writing it as A plus B, we are going to write it down as A over B. And this C over C plus D can be written as C over D. Right? So if you just divide them, if you just divide that A over B divided by C over D, what are you going to get? Or if you just write it down as A over B, A over B divided by C over D, what we will get?
AB divided by B.
AB divided by CD.
Reciprocal inverse multiplication.
Yes, ma'am. A divided by B multiplied by D divided by C.
Very good. A over B. Let me just do it again. Otherwise, some people
Multiply by D over C.
C over C.
AD over BC.
Okay. For the reciprocal, so that is going to be your AD over BC. AD over.
A.
So that is how. Now see, this AD over BC is what? Your odds ratio.
Cross product.
This means that in rare disease situations or in uncommon, infrequent disease, either whether you calculate relative risk or you calculate odds ratio, both are going to be the same. Right? And this is how we arrive at this AD over BC. Any query in this? It seems a little messy. Unfortunately, we don't have enough space. So I hope it can, if you have followed me through step by step, I'm sure you'll be able to make out that how I arrived at this AD over BC. Now see, at times in university, you may get a question in which they say that in cohort study designs, odds ratio, there comes a scenario when odds ratio is equal to relative risk, or it's exactly the approximation of relative risk. What is that scenario and how would you justify that statement? Now, if they ask you that statement for the justification and they give you that statement, that is all you need to do. That is all you need to do, and you are going to get full marks. Right? Because at times, just for the sake of checking your understanding, I hope there is nothing that is bothering you now in this particular. If there is anything that is not clear to you, please ask me. Now, here is the situation when our proportions are going to be equated for the, now see, that is odds of having disease or the probability of having disease among exposed, right? And that is the probability of having disease among non-exposed. Now, if I just write it down as A over B, that are the odds of having exposure among exposed and odds of not having disease among exposed. Odds of having disease among exposed and not having disease among exposed. Isn't it like that? It is now all or none.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
If this would have been, if this would have been 50 and 30 had 30 developed disease and 20 they did not. So if we had to write it down, sorry, this is a rare disease situation. If there would have been a 5, Mike, please, if you want to ask me any questions, please unmute, otherwise stay muted. Now see, if this would have been a proportion, we would have written it as 5 over 50. But if this is an odds, we are going to write it down as 5 over 45. Right? Similarly, for C over C plus D or C over D, if this is, say, for example, 1 and they are 49, this is just hypothetical numbers that I'm writing. If this would have been your proportion, you would have written it as 1 over 50, right? Or if this would have been an odds, you would have written it as 1 over 49. Got it?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Now it's clear.
Yes, ma'am.
मैम मैं यहाँ पे एक बात आपसे पूछ लूँ.
प्लीज आप फिनिश, आप दो बातें.
एक बात ये है कि ये जो अगर हमसे ऑड्स रेशियो और रिलेटिव रिस्क का पूछा जाता है कि किस सिचुएशन में ये इक्वल होते हैं, तो हम इसमें फिर वो रेयर डिजीज वाला ही रखेंगे ना.
Absolutely. Because they give, yeah. And remember one more thing, and I'm sure you must have read that in cohort case control studies, they are generally designed for investigating rare diseases, and especially for cancers. Generally, not hard and fast. This is not that just for cancer case control. Why people they switched over to that case control study designs? Because cohort studies, we all know that they are long studies, and we need to have lot of expenses, money, man, material, record keeping, and then there is a problem of loss to follow up. And just imagine if the disease under investigation is a rare one. So at the end, if you don't really get any positive result, this means all your efforts, they are gone wasted. So that's why, but since we have to look into the natural history of the diseases, we have to look into the ecological factors and so many other benefits that we get from cohort studies. At times we go and investigate rare diseases from cohort study designs also. So in that particular scenario, whenever the disease under investigation is there, uncommon or infrequent disease, all these terms if they've used and they say that tell us any, or at times they say that justify this statement that odds ratio and relative risk, they both can be calculated in cohort study design. So if this is, again, you will take a start that in scenarios or in situations wherever the disease under investigation is uncommon, rare, or infrequent, their relative risk or odds ratio, they both give us similar results. So odds ratio can be very safely calculated instead of relative risk, or we can manage to calculate odds ratio in rare disease situations in cohort study, but you have to justify that by showing that 2 by 2 table and by equating that a over a plus b into a plus b is equated to b, or c plus d is equated to d, and you need to convert those portions into odds, and then obviously you can arrive at your formula for the AG over BC. You have to arrive at that formula to show that yes, whether we are looking at proportions or odds, they are going to give us similar. Right, Rafimish?
Ma'am.
Okay. Now see what is written here. Again, the odds ratio, look at the caption, look at the title, odds ratio in cohort studies. Now, let us examine how the concept of odds can be applied to both cohort and case control studies. Let us first consider the cohort study design. Now, see, our first question is that what is the probability that the disease will develop in an exposed person? And we are all now familiar that what is the probability or what are the proportions. So, answer to this question is A over A plus B, because we know that probability of proportions B is out of the total. How much got diseased among exposed individuals? So how many of them disease cell was A? So A plus B. Okay. Now, since what are the odds that the disease will develop in an exposed person? Again, looking only at the top row in the table, if you have to take the odds, what you will take out? A over B. If you have to look into the odds of developing disease, what you will write down? A over
B. Ma'am, the one who are exposed and who are not exposed.
Yes, all or none. No, they are all exposed, but A are diseased and B are all those who did not develop disease among exposed.
Yes, ma'am.
Odds of developing disease among exposed A. Odds of not developing disease among exposed B. Right, Mayam?
Yes, ma'am.
And we call this formula that we took from that epibuty example initially. Okay, looking at the bottom row, probability of having disease among non-exposed, C over C plus D, and odds of having disease among non-exposed, that is going to be C over D. And I've given you the justification that what are the situations when we equate this equation to this, we move from proportions to odds. Let's see this example here. So either measure of association is valid in a cohort study, this I have told you. Just as the ratio of incidence in the exposed to the incidence in non can be used to measure an association of exposure and risk, we can also look at the ratio of odds that will develop, disease will develop in exposed to the odds that it will develop in a non-exposed, and either is valid in cohort. I told you that odds ratio can be calculated in case control and
आधे रखना जी बच्चे.
Okay, we are 29 right now, and I think meanwhile they'll join us. Let's go back to our odds ratios and concepts of proportions that we were doing, and let's take a start again. And
Oh yeah.
okay, now see in a case, now take that scenario in a case control study. This I've already drawn in front of you. That is going to be the odds of having exposure among cases. Now see, in cohort study, we were looking for odds of having disease among exposed. But here in a case control study, now we are going to look for odds of having exposure among cases and odds of having exposure among controls. Let me just admit participants quickly in, and then okay, is it clear so far? I hope there is nothing that is bothering you, or if there is anything that in your mind that might not be clear, you can ask me. Please come up with anything that is in your mind and you are not able to make out. Please ask me. See, this model we have just seen, and now we are moving on to our case control model. And again, we have already we have seen that. Let me okay, we are 23 right now. Okay, now let's take a start with cases and control. And since we do not have any information about the incidence of disease in exposed versus non-exposed persons, so we can use the odds ratio as a measure of association between exposure and disease. This is a case control study. But we asked different questions. What are the odds that a case was exposed, right? So that is what is it, A over C. And what are the odds that a control was exposed? That was B over D, right? We can then calculate odds ratio, and which in the case control is going to be the ratio of the odds that cases were exposed to the odds that the controls were exposed. And see, that is again, we have arrived at this equation of AD over BC, our cross product ratio. Okay. Let me just, okay. Odds ratio interpretation, again, it's the same. If it's going to be 1, this means equal exposure between cases and controls. If it is positively related to the disease exposure, obviously the odds ratio is going to be greater than 1. And if it is going to be less than 1, this means that the odds of having exposure was less among cases as compared to controls. Interpretation is the same for that figure of 1 greater than 1 or less than 1. Right? I just wanted you to take you to that when is the odds ratio a good estimate of a relative risk? When we are doing that in a case control study, we have seen that. Whereas I told you that in a cohort study, either we can take both of these measures. Let me just look into those conditions. I'll come to those conditions also. Let me just take you to this part. Look at this. What is written on the top? Example is based on a rare disease assumption. Whenever there is a rare disease, recall, there is somebody, Mayum wants to get in. Recall that A plus B were the exposed persons, because most diseases with which we are dealing occur infrequently. Very few persons in an exposed population, they will actually develop the disease. So consequently, A is going to be very small compared to B. And one can always approximate A plus B as B, or A plus B is more or less equal to B. This is what I was writing on the whiteboard to make you understand that what exactly happens in a rare disease assumption. Right? So similarly, very few non-exposed persons, C plus D, obviously they are going to develop. So we can approximate that as C plus D as D. So we may calculate our relative risk as follows. So that A over A plus B, so generally, so that means that relative risk and odds ratio in a rare disease assumption, they are going to be exactly the same, which is the odds ratio. The odds ratio is a good estimate of the relative risk whenever the disease is infrequent. And I told you that generally in a case control studies, once we will talk about those studies in detail, I'll let you know that in a case control studies, we have certain assumptions to be fulfilled. Our cases should be such that should be newly diagnosed and incident cases. They all should fulfill an operational definition, or they all need to fulfill an eligibility criteria before that they are enrolled in the study. We need to match our cases with the controls, otherwise it is going to be biased. Our controls, if they are not comparable with the cases, obviously we are not going to get valid and generalizable results, right? If you just look at this 2 by 2 table and the figures they have been given to you, you can see that we are having 10,000 exposed and 10,000 non-exposed individuals. So if you calculate relative risk for that, it comes out to be 2. And if you calculate odds ratio for that, that is again going to be somewhat 2. So this means that it's a very good estimate of relative risk whenever the disease under investigation is infrequent, right? And if any such question comes in exam, you need to make that, you need to show that through equation approximations and equation that we have shown, that how do we convert our proportions into odds, that how that proportions they are converted into odds, right? So that's how we calculate our odds ratio in a rare disease situation. Our relative risk is going to be equal to odds ratio. So what are the different points that we need to remember? That relative odds or odds ratio, again, it is written here also. It's a useful measure of association in itself, both case control and prospective. Prospective studies are which studies? Okay, let me just ask somebody who is right now. How many students there are with me? There are 24. Ji, Dr. Naik. Dr. Naik is, I think he has just joined us in this session. Ji, Dr. Naik.
जी मैम मैं शुरू से आपके साथ हूँ.
Okay, sorry, probably I might have not seen you. जी, prospective studies are which studies?
मैम जिसमें हम फर्दर आगे एडवांस में देख रहे हैं कि फर्दर क्या होता
है. Yeah, what do we call them? What do we call them, Dr. Inayat? Ji, Dr. Inayat.
जी मैम.
जी, Dr. Inayat, what do we call them?
किस सेंस में मैम?
What's the other term used for prospective studies?
इसके cohort studies.
Very well done. Cohort studies, excellent. The term used for prospective studies, not cohort studies. Okay. And so in case control studies, the relative risk can't be calculated, so we move on to cross product ratio, and it is an estimate of relative risk whenever the disease risk is low, right? So this we have already seen. Now, can you all see that? Cases and controls? Can you make a 2 by 2 table from this data that is provided to you? Say, for example, they are exposed and non-exposed. Ji, Dr. Inayat, can you make a 2 by 2 table for this data?
जी मैम
Please make 2 by 2 table. Now see, I'm going to. I think I've enabled participants for sharing. If I just share and
अब क्या करें इसका?
if I just
टूथपेस्ट लगाएं.
multiple participants can share. Now I've unlocked that option. So please, all of you, you can make it. Sorry. Now you all can make 2 by 2 tables with you, and you can share your screens with me. Please make this a 2 by 2 table for these cases and controls with respect to this data. Put them into exposed and non-exposed, and calculate odds ratio for this also. Are you able to do that on your whiteboards?
Yes, ma'am.
Please do that and share with me. And Dr. Inayat will take the lead in that. Quickly and calculate your odds ratio also, please. Can we convert this data into a 2 by 2 table? G. Dr. Inayat, have you made your 2 by 2 table?
मैम इसमें 6 केसेस उसमें एक्सपोज्ड में
Okay.
6 केसेस मैम एक्सपोज्ड में उसमें उसके कंट्रोल में 4 हैं. ए में
Can you share your screen? Yeah. I've stopped sharing mine, so you can always share your screen, please.
मैम वो तो कॉपी पे कर रहे हैं.
You go to share screen. Yeah, yes, good. This is Kiran Gandhi, right? Kiran, is this yours?
No, ma'am. Ma'am, I'm doing on paper. I can send you a screenshot. Ma'am.
Okay.
हम
So
लोग तो
please,
पेपर से
anyone
कर
of
रहे हैं.
you can, anyone of you can do that because I've unlocked that option. Please go to share screen, click on your whiteboard and make 2 by 2 table. Ji Mariam Ahmed. Now I can view Mariam Ahmed's screen. Ji Mariam, please do that. Good. Very good. There are the cases and there are the controls.
Okay.
Very good. Odds ratio would be
क्या करूं? किस तरह निकालूं? मुझे कहाँ आता है?
very well done. Very good, Mariam Ahmed. Brilliant. Excellent, Betty. Excellent. Very well done. Okay, what's your answer? I guess this comes out to be 1 point something, if I'm not wrong. So let's see.
Ma'am, 3.5 है.
3.5.
So it's a 6. You were so right, bete. 6, 3, 4, and 7. And if we just look at this table, cases and controls, if E is for exposed and N are for non-exposed, you need to make, this is how, the way exactly Mariam made her 2 by 2 table, this is how we made it. So, and whenever we have to calculate, this is just the explanation of that table. You come up to your odds ratio, this comes out to be 3.5. I told you that your answer is incomplete till the time of interpretation. So who would like to, Dr. Inayat, can you interpret this? 3.5? Now try to interpret that. जी
मैम 3.5 जो है इसका relative risk of disease जो है 3.5 times higher है.
Dr. Inayat, just look at my screen. What we are calculating is this relative risk.
Odds ratio, sorry.
Odds ratio, absolutely, right? So in odds ratio, now this is a very important point. Why I've asked you for the interpretation, because here I'm going to, first you complete your interpretation. You said that 3.5 something you were telling. Please complete your interpretation so that I can see your understanding. Ji, please go ahead.
जी मैम रिस्क ऑफ जो एक्सपोज्ड उसमें थे जो एक्सपोज्ड पर्सन थे उनमें 3.5 टाइम्स डिजीज ज्यादा थी एज कंपेयर्ड टू नॉन एक्सपोज्ड.
We'll take a start with exposed individuals here in odds ratio. Odds ratio is calculated in case control study. You have seen Mariam wrote cases and controls on the top. Now cases,
number of cases were 3.5 times higher than जो cases normal थे जो cases develop नहीं हुए जिनमें
नहीं हुआ develop. So are we looking into the development of disease or are we looking into something else? हम ये odds ratio study design में है Dr. Inayat, where we generally calculate odds ratio.
हमको hard study थी.
We calculate odds ratio in case control studies.
Case control, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. See, this was the data that was given to you. That's why I asked you to make 2 by 2 table, right? So I'm sure you must have written cases and controls on the top. So we look into their exposure status in the past. And okay, who is going to give me interpret? Kiran, can you try interpreting this 3.5 odds ratio?
Yes, ma'am. Odds ratio is, ma'am, probability of disease is 3.5% more in exposed people as compared to the non-exposed.
Probability of having disease is 3.5 percentage. So beta ye nahi hai, it's a ratio. So we, whenever you have to interpret ratio, ji beta, who is this?
Ma'am, the ratio.
Let me just जी मरियम इसहाक जी बेटे.
अगर ऑड रेशियो ग्रेटर देन 1 आती है तो हमें इसको नेगेटिव एसोसिएशन में नहीं डालेंगे.
No, negative positive association. More likely. Yeah, whenever it is greater than 1, this is rest assured it is positive, because see, this is researchers' hypothesis. This is researchers' wish and will and assumption, because your assumption is that this exposure is, the case is definitely going to be more exposed as compared to control. This is your assumption, right? In the beginning, this is what you want to prove from your research also. So if you get your results positive, this means positive. Whenever it is more among cases, because here you are looking for exposure status among cases. So if exposure is more among cases, so this means your assumption is fulfilled. Your hypothesis is correct. So what you will find out? You'll say, anyone else would like...
मैम हम इसमें इंटरप्रेट इस तरह करेंगे कि एक्सपोजर इज पॉजिटिवली रिलेटेड टू द डिजीज.
Okay, anyone else? I did share the interpretations in the last session also, but I think this is the right time where we should... जी बेटे बताइए.
Ma'am, like if the relative list is greater than 1, then we say that the 2 times more positive association hai.
Ma'am,
last time you told
Yes.
Yeah, but we really need to look into the exposure status and into the disease status. See, in cohort, just focus into this number 3.5 and disease under investigation, or the research design under investigation is your case control study. So this means that they're already diseased. We are searching diseased individuals for their possible exposure in the past. So we will try to interpret your results also. The simplest interpretation that I would like to tell you that cases were cases. Yes, deal with this. Gee, Shanila, if I can complete that, then I will definitely take your input, please. Cases were 3.5 times, not percentage. Cases were 3.5 times more likely exposed to the risk factor as compared to controls. Simple. Cases. It's a case control study, so you can always take a start while interpreting. If you forget how should I take a start for interpretation, look into your study design. If it's a case control, take a start with cases and you simply write down, I'll mark you correct. Simply write down that cases were 3.5 times more likely exposed to any particular risk factor that is under investigation. Say, for example, if it's you have taken coronary heart disease cases and you are looking for their smoking exposure in the past, so you can always say that cases were 3.5 times more likely to be smokers in their past as compared to control. Or cases were 3.5 times more likely exposed to the risk factor, or they were more likely exposed to smoking as compared to controls. Or if you go by the bookish interpretation or insert, and generally this is how it's written, so you can say that odds of having exposure is 3.5 times more among cases as compared to controls. Why I'm not telling both of them together, because you might confuse that. But simple, if you stick to that, that cases were 3.5 times more likely exposed to smoking as compared to controls in their past. Is it clear so far? Because now I'm going to tell you simultaneously that if this would have been a relative risk, if this would have been a cohort study design, whenever I say relative risk means cohort. If this would have been a relative risk for a cohort study design, how would you interpret this number? Say, for example, your relative risk comes out to be 3.5. Then how would you interpret that? Recall your study design. You take a start with your exposure. We take a start with exposed individuals. We follow them up for the possible disease status in future later on in time. So you might say that exposed individuals are 3.5 times more likely to develop this particular disease as compared to non-exposed individuals. I'm repeating, exposed individuals are 3.5 times more likely to develop the disease, or more likely to end up in disease, or more likely to develop the disease as compared to controls, or as compared to non-exposed individuals. Is it clear now? Please write them up with you. Write it down with you.
मैम ये दोनों केसेस में मेरा ख्याल है कि मैं अपने अगर बात करूं तो हम जो हमारी जजमेंट थी इसकी इंटरप्रिटेशन करने में वो डिफरेंट थी. जैसे हम इसमें ऑड्स रेशो में हम जो आपने अभी बताई है वो हम ढूंढ रहे थे, आई मीन एसोसिएशन विद डेवलपिंग डिजीज. अदरवाइज ये जो ऑड्स रेशो है ये केस कंट्रोल में इट टेल्स अबाउट द एसोसिएशन ऑफ disease of cases relative are compared to control. और मैं इसको जो है वो इस odds ratio को
in the context of exposure.
In the context of exposure, yes.
Yes.
So I think अभी थोड़ा सा clear आ गया.
Now is it clear?
Yes, it's clear now.
Now see, I just gave, say for example, you have calculated odds ratio and it comes out the way we have seen 3.5. and say, for example, if you have done some cohort study design and you have calculated relative risk and it comes out to be somewhat around why I'm not taking exactly the same, because some people they might get confused. This means that in both ways we can interpret. No, odds ratio is basically taken in a case control study. And again, I'll move back to the real essence of these measures of association. Although I told you that odds ratio is one measure that can be calculated in both, right? But the situation is infrequent or rare disease assumptions is there, and it is basically calculated for odds ratio in case control, and relative risk is basically calculated for cohort. Now I'm telling you the key for interpreting these, because most of the time students they get confused at interpretation and they try to overlook. Overlooking interpretations means that you have missed your 2 marks straight away, because that is we can say that without interpretation it's just a number. Till the time you haven't interpreted or explained your answer, this means that you don't have understanding for that. If it's an odds ratio, so please take a start with cases. Cases, it's a retrospective study, right? We try to dig out cases and their possible exposure in the past. So it says that cases were 3.5 times more likely exposed to that particular risk factor, any particular risk factor that is either given in the example or that you are investigating in your research. 3.4 times. It's not a percentage or anything else, because we are trying to quantifying the strength of the association, right? And since it's 3.5, that this is understood that this is positive till the time it's not in decimals. So cases were 3.5 times more likely exposed to that particular risk factor as compared to controls. That is your odds ratio interpretation, right? And in cohort study design, that generally we proceed forward-looking or prospective. They are retrospective. We go back in time and try to dig out the possible exposures. They are retro and they are prospective. There are multiple types of these studies, but I'm sticking to the basic concept of these so that you may remember that rather than going into the further details, because they are not required right now. We will definitely talk about all these study designs in detail, inshallah, later on at the right time. In prospective, so what we take a start with exposure. Here, we say that exposed individuals are 4 times more likely to end up into this particular disease as compared to non-exposed individuals, right? If we are looking for the association of coronary heart disease and smoking, right? And we are studying it in the form of a case control study. So we'll say that coronary heart disease cases were 3.5 times more likely exposed to smoking as compared to controls. Got it? But if this would have been a prospective study and we are looking for that how many smokers they end up into coronary heart disease or they develop coronary heart disease in a 10 years time period, then how would we interpret that? We'll take a start with smokers. We'll say that smokers are 4 times more likely to develop coronary heart disease as compared to non-smokers. Both of them are measures of association. This measure of association we will get if we are taking case control as our study design. But if we have a cohort study design, we'll take our relative risk as a measure of association. The interpretation would be slightly different. But both of them are telling us about the strength of association. Ratio measures.
मैम एक क्वेश्चन है
जी प्लीज
हम ऑड्स रेशियो को एस्टिमेशन ऑफ रिलेटिव रिस्क किस उस पे कह सकते हैं?
It's an estimate because we have seen just right now that they are very robust. Whatever calculations or the equations they have been generated by the researchers, they are on the basis of solid logic behind, right? So what they did that, because in case control studies we can't really calculate incidence, right? So to overcome that deficiency, what they did, they say that okay, we need to create one such variable, or we need to create one such measure that should give us, that should compensate basically. It's a sort of compensation, or it's a sort of approximation in the terms. So that's why, so once they weigh and balance, they saw that whether we, and I told you that case control studies, they are generally taken for rare diseases, right? Infrequent diseases. So we have seen that in infrequent disease situations, whether you calculate relative risk or whether you calculate odds ratio, both of them are going to give you similar results. That are the basis. Okay, anyone else? Anything that is not clear so far? Or anything that is bothering you that you want to ask? Okay, let me just go back to the presentation and see where we left at the interpretation part. So again, here it's the same case control. They have taken it up, odds ratio in a cross product ratio that comes out to be 1.62, and it's an odds ratio example. They have calculated it. Now coming on to another, I assume that this concept is now clear, because I'm asking you again and again that if there is anything that is left unclear, you can ask me. Please ask me anything that is not clear, because now we are going to move up into a very important concept linked with case control studies, linked with odds ratio. And for that purpose, we need to be clear in our previous concepts. Okay, now what types of case control combinations are possible in regard to exposure history? Right? Now, do we understand what is this written? What possible combinations we can get? Any idea? Clearly, if exposure dichotomous means what? Dichotomous is two ways, yeah, two, binary, or whenever you say that, like the way you say the binary variable or dichotomous variable, then anything who might be having two options, either yes or no, or a person might be exposed or a person might not be exposed, right? So only the following four types of case control pairs are possible. Pairs, if we look into the scenario, case control combinations. Now, there might be many cases who might be exposed, and there might be very similar controls who might be exposed also. And there might be cases who are exposed, or there might be non-exposed, and there might be controls who are non-exposed, right? So this means that we might have concordant pairs and discordant. First, we need to familiarize with these terms, concordant pair and discordant pair. Concordant pairs are what? What types of pairs? They are the ones in which both case and control, they are exposed. And discordant pairs are the ones, or they are exposed, or in which both of them are non-exposed. And discordant pairs, or we can say that they are dichotomous pairs, or discordant means that either one is exposed or the other is non-exposed, or the other is exposed, the other one is exposed. How do we write it down in the form of a 2x2 table? Let me just show it to you. If we just have to make pairs of cases and controls, they are cases. I hope you all have recordings for these sessions. Let me just make it again. Do you all get my recordings for these sessions?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Right from day one or ever since I have started recording these sessions?
Ma'am, since you have started recording the sessions.
Okay, and before that you don't have any?
No, ma'am.
So what two possible options we might be having for cases and controls? Or what two possible options we might be having for controls?
Ma'am, either both are exposed or non-exposed.
Yes. Now see, either controls are going to be exposed or either controls are going to be non. Let me just stop share. I had to give permission to two of the participants to let in. Okay. Now these two options we might be having for the controls, or these two options we might be having for cases also. Now does this make sense? A, B, C. Now we are going to write them up as pairs. Now A cell represents a concordant cell. It's a concordant. Concordant means it's a one in which both cases and controls are exposed. Right? And D is also a concordant cell in which neither case is exposed or neither control is exposed. Isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Now they are discordant in which case is exposed but control is non-exposed. And here case is non-exposed but control is exposed. Now you got this concept of concordant and discordant pairs. In case control study, we have two different types of case control studies. One is known as matched case control and the other is known as unmatched case control, right? Generally, matching should be done in a case control study, right? So with the help of these different case control studies, we are going to have these two different types of odds ratios, right? Matched and unmatched odds ratios. Unmatched odds ratio and matched odds ratio. Whatever we have been talking so far, that was unmatched odds ratio, generally the odds ratio that is calculated in our studies. Generally the odds ratio that is calculated, I'm telling you generally the odds ratio that is calculated in odds ratio is unmatched, and the formula that we have taken is AD over BC, right? The way we have been calculating 2x2 tables, cases, controls, and we had exposure status in the rows. But once we are looking into a matched odds ratio, our formula is going to be B over C. I'll explain this in the next meeting because we are having less